Welcome to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilssen. We feature top entrepreneurs and thought leaders from around the world, those who bring a global mindset and a unique perspective to their life and business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey, David Nilssen here. I am the host of this podcast. On the Future is Borderless, we connect with business leaders from around the world who have what I like to refer to as a borderless mindset. And the purpose here is to share best practices, new innovations, new ideas, things that will help us power growth in both our personal and professional lives so that we can continue to thrive in a rapidly changing world. Now, this episode is brought to you by Doxa Talent. Doxa helps businesses to source full-time, highly skilled workers from all over the world. And as a result, these companies can scale faster, increase margin, and improve culture. If you want to learn how to grow your business with offshore talent, simply visit doxatalent.com. All right. Well, today's going to actually be a very interesting show. My guest is Boaz Ashkenazy, he's a visionary leader who is shaping the future of work through strategic integration of AI and business operations. Boaz is dedicated to building an AI-first company that empowers businesses to harness the power of generative AI. And he's drawing on his experiences at Meta, where he played a role in developing innovative productivity solutions. And he's also had significant involvement in many tech startups, helping them to scale their operations. And Boaz has this sort of multifaceted skill that sets him apart and fuels his passion for transformative change. Boaz is the host of the Shift AI podcast, which is syndicated by GeekWire. And lastly, I just want to note that he's also represents small businesses on the National Small Business Association's Leadership and Technology Council. And with that, Boaz, welcome to the show.
All right, thanks. I appreciate being on.
Cool. Well, this will be a fun conversation. I think maybe I'd start with just taking a step back and just zooming out for a second, just to talk about your business, Simply Augmented. Today, you guys, as I mentioned in the intro, are helping small businesses, or businesses in general, I should say, leverage the power of AI. But that isn't exactly where you started with Simply Augmented. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what the business does and how that has evolved over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. So Simply Augmented in its early incarnations was really focused on XR. And when you think about XR, it's typically VR, AR, and we were doing a lot of AI as it, within the XR delivery. And what happened over that time was I got really involved in a group called the Kronos Group. And the Kronos Group is a body, a nonprofit organization that was setting the standard for 3D on the web. And in the process of being part of that group and setting some of that criteria and those standards, I came across a lot of big companies that were also trying to figure that out too. And I chaired a committee that included Microsoft and Amazon and Target and Wayfair and Facebook and many, many others, just trying to kind of get to a place where we had some consistent criteria for what 3D was going to look like. And I got approached by Facebook after being part of that group, and they asked me to join the company. And when I did, I got involved in a lot of internal productivity tooling within the organization, very, very focused on employees. And coming out of that, got really excited about ways that AI and productivity tools could impact small businesses. And so I was approached by an engineer at Meta and another engineer at Apple, and to start another incarnation of Simply Augmented that really, really focused on helping small businesses leverage AI.
Yeah, let's keep going down that path then, because obviously Meta is a massive organization and they have a lot of resources, the ability to build these large scale teams internally that help them solve for these productivity issues. What did you learn there? Like, how has that experience sort of shifted or informed your approach to using AI in business operations, specifically those that you're taking to your clients?
It's interesting. Before that time, I was a small business owner and, worked on a lot of startups and small companies, and never worked at a big company like that before. And it was really an amazing experience. And I learned a ton. So not only were the teams large, but we were having a huge impact on the way that employees were learning and were also being productive. So when I joined, everybody was sent home because it was right after the pandemic. And so we had to deal with all sorts of people in the company. It wasn't just software engineers that we were working with. It was recruiters, software engineers, people in the reality lab space, facilities people, data centers, all sorts of folks. And so part of the job was to understand how to get people to work better remotely. And that was a lot of Zoom, a lot of headset, VR, and AR. But then also how to build chatbots and other AI related tooling just to help them be more efficient and effective. And what I found was, at scale, you can really have a big impact by doing small things within groups. And, one example of that was on the recruiting org. We had a long project with the recruiting org where we were able to do very strategic things around the interview process and around, the process of bringing folks through that workflow. And one of the things that I learned over that time was to break things down into smaller chunks. And I still apply that, when I talk to small businesses, because it could be daunting to think about all the different ways that efficiency can happen across a workflow. But if you just attack one thing at a time, it's really, really helpful. And it doesn't matter if you have thousands and thousands of employees or if you just have 100. You really have to break everything down into small chunks and then attack those things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. As you're saying this, I'm thinking to myself, how much of your work depends on the fact that your client or future client has clarity on what their processes are? I mean, I've seen this, historically with business owners. They tend to be, small business owners tend to be a little bit more, fast and loose with processes versus very prescriptive. And so how much of it is dependent on being more prescriptive and helping people gain clarity over their own processes?
I'll go back to the Meta, example, because it applies to both. And one of the things that happened to me when I was at Meta was I joined the company and it was Facebook and the name changed to Meta while I was there. And when that happened, if you remember, there was a huge amount of energy around the metaverse. Big companies were launching metaverse projects, but also internally, we had a lot of departments that were also trying to figure out like what their strategy was going to be. And I can remember a lot of the work that I did there, I called it painstorming, because the painstorming allowed me to go into those groups and say, what is the problem? Not what's the technology, what's the cool technology, can we put on headsets, but what's the problem? And I do that now too. And I think that's a big part of where you start, because nobody wants to run around with technology chasing a problem. You have to start with a problem first. And there needs to be a lot of pain. And it needs to be a core function of the business. There are a lot of AI startups right now that are solving problems around efficiency and email and presentation tools. There's a ton of startups doing that. But when you can go into a company and really understand what the real pain is and how fixing that pain can affect the way that you deliver value to your customers, all of a sudden that can be really, really impactful.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about maybe the philosophy around AI, because I think that's actually important for people to understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish. I think there's this, I wouldn't say widespread, but I think there are two schools of thought on this topic, right? One is that AI is going to decimate jobs globally. The other is that it may actually be more of a force multiplier. So I'm just curious, how do you think about AI and its sort of role in the talent landscape as we roll forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you and I share kind of a similar idea about this. I really, really believe in AI, and I'm a very optimistic person as it relates to AI. So I land kind of on the optimist side, I would say, of the argument versus the doomsdayers. But I really believe that people are going to be in the loop. Humans are going to be in the loop. And it's a term that we hear thrown around. But I fundamentally believe that they need to be in the process at the beginning and in the process at the end. And what I mean by that is, being able to either prompt or guide what the workflow optimization needs to be is important. And it's going to be us that does that. But then at the end, we want to touch these things. I don't believe that we can just let the machines run and then things can kind of go out the door without us looking at them. And the perfect example is email. I use a tool that I love that can help me automate my emails and get drafts spun up. But I'm looking at everything that goes out the door. And I'm also touching it too. So there is a little bit of human touch. And I think a lot of people just think that, okay, I've got a problem that I want automated and optimized, and I'm just going to kind of turn AI onto it. And then I never have to think about that again. But that's not true. I use the metaphor of an intern a lot when I talk about AI. And this is true whether you're a developer or whether you're a marketing person or just an ops person. And that is, imagine having a really amazing intern that never gets tired and that's, always happy, and they're always willing to do the work for you. But they're a young intern and they need to be checked. And if you're a senior developer, you want to take a look before that goes out the door. You want to take a look at your code before it gets out the door. But it is massively efficient to be able to have someone working for you like that all the time. And that's how I think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. We're in the same boat. We think about it in terms of human plus, right? I think it does increase over time the expectations for what we can produce on a per person basis. But I don't foresee in the near term it changing the fact that we still need people to be involved in our businesses on a daily basis. So, yeah. Maybe in along those lines, you could share what are some of the problems that you're helping companies solve for today? I love how you said problem or pain storming is what you called it. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing that you're excited about working on?
Yeah. I know we're going to get to some of the stuff that we're working on together, but I will say, like, one of the big problems that I see out there is around qualifying customers. And we're working on a project right now that I think is really interesting. And it's conversational AI. So a chat bot that lives on your website that can have a conversation with your prospects, but a conversation that allows a back and forth. It's not just answering questions and being this expert, but it's also qualifying customers and being able to ask the right questions. And when that conversation can happen in the right way, where I think the people on the other side know it's an AI, but it feels kind of human and it's getting to the right questions quickly. That can be the kind of experience that we typically don't experience with customer service and customer success. Yeah. I'm used to feeling frustrated whenever I get on a phone call with somebody in the customer support space, or if I get onto a website and start chatting in customer support. I actually think, based on the stuff that we're doing right now, that's going to change. It's not going to be like you're chatting with a human completely, but it's going to have a flow that makes it way more efficient, but also delightful to be able to get the information that you need and then also be qualified or not. And from the customer side, from the business side, you're going to be able to have a sales team that's much smaller, but much more effective if they can get a summary and bullet points of the conversation that the AI had with the customer, and then they can act on it. So it kind of goes back to the human in the loop conversation. Is how nice would it be to be able to have a bunch of questions and qualifications happen so that when it's your time to get into the Zoom meeting and really shine and be in your genius zone, you have all the information that you need and you can move quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And in fact, it's funny, like, I think about my experience being on websites. In fact, the other day I had to deal with one of the airlines in terms of a customer experience challenge, and it was painful. Like, it wasn't even a little bit painful. It was extremely painful. So I could see why that would be the case. Yeah. And I know lots of companies that are filtering through high volumes of leads, and they unleash a legion of BDRs or SDRs to try and or some sort of complicated lead scoring algorithm. And I think there's a real need for us to do that, especially since it feels like the online lead generation landscape is just becoming more fragmented all the time. So that's very cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's
There's
talk
another thing that I want to. Oh yeah, there's one more thing that I want to share. Yeah, that's okay. There's one more thing that I want to share about another project that we're working on that I think has implications for businesses too. And it's something that I dealt with a lot when I was at Meta, and I think that a lot of companies deal with now, which is a universal search. So we are working on a project that allows a team to be able to go into their own database and search things that they can share with prospects. So imagine a sales team that has hours and hours of recorded audio content, or years and years of blog posts where there's nuggets of really great information in there. But manually, it's hard to kind of suck that out of the system and then share that in emails or blog posts or LinkedIn messages. So we've developed a universal search that can go into company information and be able to get those nuggets out really quickly and easily. And it just empowers that team to be able to use that. And I think that a lot of companies have that problem is, hey, where did I hear that person talking about this information that's relevant to me? And how do I get to it? And who's the expert on it? And how many people is it going to take for me to call or to text to be able to get that information. That's the problem to be solved.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. Well, even today, I was looking for something that should be very simple for me to find, and wasn't, right? And it would be really nice to have a solution that would allow us to access that information much faster, certainly more efficient. Boaz, let's talk about, you and I got in touch, I don't know, about 6 months ago. We've known each other for a while. So in full disclosure, it's not the first time we had connected. Yeah. But we had a chance to talk about some of the pain points in our business. And I'm excited because, as of this week, we made the announcement that we've decided to do a venture together where we're trying to solve some critical issues for Doxa using AI. And we're going to work with the Simply Augmented team for that. And we've already started to make some great progress there. I'd love to just take a minute and talk a little bit about what it is that we are exploring together. And maybe I could start by just sharing the pain point I disclosed to you. And then maybe you could sort of, at a high level, just describe some of the work that we're doing now.
Yeah.
Okay. So when Boaz and I first talked, one of the things I shared with him is that I'm really proud of the fact that we are hiring less than 1% of the people that apply at Doxa. And what I meant by that is not that we were keeping people out, or nor that we were like an elitist organization, but we always say that we're helping people build these scalable, highly productive teams of skilled labor offshore. But what's funny is what I was sharing with him is there's some massive inefficiencies. It takes us a huge amount of effort to get down to that group of people that we're going to hire. And the example I gave him was in this year, we expect to increase our team by about 400 and some odd people, but we have to actually sort through nearly 60,000 resumes to get to that number. And we have to deploy a tremendous amount of human capital, even though there is some automation available, and we definitely use technology to make that work. And so when I talked to Boaz, I was like, man, if we could get to a place where that 60,000 gets filtered down to a much smaller number very quickly, and then we're spending our time doing the site screen and the HR interviews and some of the pre-work that we do before we even endorse these people to our clients, that would be a huge win for us. And so we decided to work with Simply Augmented. Maybe, Boaz, you could talk a little bit about what that looks like.
I mean, there is so much about this project that I'm excited about, but I'll just start with explaining kind of what it does. And on a very, very high level, it is scoring resumes against job descriptions at a very high level. But what's happening inside there is really unique because we have multiple LLMs, large language models, AI, that are looking at the resumes, the unstructured data that's happening in the resumes, and then establishing evidence about that resume, and then looking at the job description and also doing the same thing and ranking that evidence with importance. Why is that important? Because if you took AI and just pointed it directly at a resume, it would give you back answers. And the funny thing about AI is that it always gives you back an answer. You can't guarantee that it's going to be the right answer, but it'll sound really confident giving you the answer. And so you have to be very, very careful about making sure that the scores that you're getting back are accurate. And we've done that. So what we've done is we've gone in and established evidence based on these resumes and job descriptions, and then ranked those resumes against those job descriptions. And it's really, really powerful, and it's exciting because it is working really well. And one of the other things about these kinds of automated systems is you really need to be able to understand what's happening inside these large language models and evaluate that. So we've created evaluation and testing mechanisms to look at it and say, let's run this through 5 or 6 times and make sure that we're getting accurate, consistent results that are pushing the top 10% of resumes to the top. And we feel really good about that. So we're excited.
Yeah, super excited, because that means, again, as we talked about earlier, it's not that we're eliminating the need for people. It will just allow our people to spend more time with the candidates that matter most based on the work that we've earned in that moment. And I want to just clarify. So we've been running tests, right? So we've taken job orders that we've already filled and used historical applicants and, at least the guts of these historical applicants, and then the job descriptions, and tried to understand, like, hey, we have rock stars that we've hired in these different roles. Would they have also sort of floated up to the top in that process. And what we found is that is in fact happening. And so it's helping us cull the list of this many names to this many names, the people that we can really spend time with. And what I'm most excited about as a business owner, to your point earlier, there's a pain point, which is how do we get better people in seat faster for our clients? And so it's about creating more jobs and velocity behind the placements that we're doing. And so the early evidence has been outstanding. We haven't gone fully live with it, right? We've just made the announcement. There's been a lot of work that's going into it, but we're excited enough about the results to go public because we know this will be transformative for our business as we go forward in the new year.
It's so cool too, because it goes back to what we talked about before. And I truly believe that people that work for you want to be in their genius zone and want to live in the place where they're excited to wake up every day and they have a lot of energy when they go to work. And if you take a recruiter, for example, they're a lot of times they want to be in front of people. They want to be talking. They want to be closing the deal. They want to be sourcing. And this allows them to do what they do best. You know, and it puts them in that 20% of, you know, what's really moving the needle for the business and what's bringing me energy every day. And so when you look at a big stack of resumes and have part of that job being done by your AI assistant, it can really leverage their talents and also create a lot of energy within the business.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because if you look at our hiring pipeline, there's 6 different steps really for us to go from a resume to a hire. And in that process, this will help us create massive efficiency in 2 of those processes, which should, again, like I said, it'll end up helping us put more people to work with our clients faster than we ever have before. So I'm really excited about this and excited to sort of share with the world as we continue to go forward, because I know this is just one of many different places we'll have a chance to collaborate. Let's talk about your podcast. So you're on the Future is Borderless today.
Sure.
Appreciate you being here. You have a podcast though, Shift AI, which as I shared at the very beginning, this is syndicated through GeekWire. And on this, you're talking to thought leaders, primarily in the technology/AI landscape, right? But these are people that, you know, are sort of at the center of all the things that are happening today. This very dynamic landscape. I'm just curious, you know, what are some of the sort of what I would say commonalities or trends that you're encountering as you're talking to all these different thought leaders, and how will these things shape the future of work? So just, you know, just observations, I guess.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you calling out the Shift AI podcast. It's definitely something that I'm really excited about. And you mentioned at the beginning too that I sit on the National Small Business Association Leadership Council and Technology Council. And the Shift AI podcast is as much about AI as it is about work. And, you know, it's an interview show. We elevate AI thought leaders, both founders, investors, incumbents, people that work at big companies, but it's also about work. And what I found as a trend on the show is that, you know, people identify themselves with their work, and work is going to really change for all of us in the future because of AI, because of remote work, what we've just went through with the pandemic. And we talk a lot about that on the show. Yeah. And what I find is that it's interesting to hear about people's backgrounds, about what their first jobs were, what their parents did, what the work that they do now, how is AI going to impact that? And, you know, one of the things that I've been getting really excited about is about policy and how policy affects work. Oren Etzioni, who was the former CEO of AI2, was on the show and talking about his meetings with President Biden and about what the administration cares about. And incidentally, this week, it's interesting because the Biden administration has come out with their executive order on AI, which talks a lot about what regulation is going to look like and how these policies are going to affect the public. And so I just think it's an exciting time to be thinking about not only the tools and the impact on business, but the impact on society. And we talk a lot about that on Shift AI.
Yeah. Let's talk about what's come out in the last few weeks from the White House, because, you know, this is a big step, because mostly I would say policymakers have been pretty quiet on this topic, right? It's a very dynamic environment. But what is the role that policymakers should play? And you know, what is it that they're trying to do with some of this, by having a position in this area? What is it that you see that they're trying to do, and what do you believe they should be doing, I guess?
Yeah, it's there's a lot to it, but I think there's some themes that are coming out, and privacy is a big theme for sure. But also I think as an election season comes along, deep fakes and other issues related to the way that AI is going to show up in our elections, in our government, is also a big issue. I know it's one of the things that President Biden is really concerned about. The other thing I think that's also interesting about this is the way that small businesses and big businesses show up within these regulations. And I'm very, very passionate about the small business side. And there's an open source community right now in AI that's actually pretty powerful. And Meta has been playing a big part in releasing open source software like Llama 2. And then there's also this closed source community as well, like OpenAI and Anthropic. And right now, a lot of the regulation and some of these issues are around how do we ensure that big tech doesn't just take over the landscape, and that there's room for smaller businesses, there's room for the open source community. And I think it's not resolved yet, but I think that's going to be a big part of how this plays out. And actually, in Seattle here, AI2 has been thinking a lot about open source as well, and trying to make a lot of these models available to developers.
Yeah, you brought up privacy as one component of this, but there's sort of this ethical use that's the broader layer, right? We know like every new technology has a superpower and it also has a kryptonite, right? That's just kind of the nature of it. But I guess if I were to just put this back at Simply Augmented, like how do you ensure that the AI systems developed within Simply Augmented are not only effective, but also used ethically, I guess? Do you guys have a position on that? Is that something that you actively think about or filter for?
Yeah, I think about it in terms of how these systems are being tested and evaluated. And when you look at the things that are happening now in states like New York and California, there's a bunch of bills that are coming through the Senate there. They talk a lot about that businesses, if they deploy AI, are going to make sure that these are tested and evaluated properly. There's so many unknowns about this new type of software. It's not as deterministic as it used to be. And you need to be able to have certain kinds of frameworks to ensure that you can get predictability, as much predictability as you can. And I think there's going to be a huge ecosystem of evaluation techniques and evaluation solutions, so that before anything goes out the door, you've got some way to establish metrics around what you're doing, and if that stuff is ethical and responsible. Yeah. And so I think we're going to be trying really hard to not only make the solutions, but also make the applications that test the solutions.
Yeah, that's super cool. I like the idea that you guys will play a part in helping to build something that will give people a better understanding of the impacts of whatever it is that they're going to deploy. I love that as a sort of a way to continue to help people build, but also do it thoughtfully. This may be a really difficult question, but it's funny as I think, over the next 3 to 5 year horizon. Today, it seems like every single day, a new tool, a new feature, a new widget's being released that has AI capabilities. But where do you see, like, if you look ahead 5 years from now, what does the business landscape look like related to some of these new technologies and how it will change us? Pull out your crystal ball. Tell me what it looks like.
Yeah. Well, I think about it philosophically in the way that I think about what Simply Augmented does. And as I look into the future, I just think that this year, everyone is putting AI next to their name and everybody's talking about AI. That's going to go away, but AI is still going to be everywhere. I really believe that this is on the level of the internet in terms of how impactful it's going to be on our lives and our businesses. It's just going to be a lot quieter and more invisible, but it's going to be everywhere. Yeah. And you look at what Microsoft is doing now with Copilot, there's not going to be a tool that we use every day that doesn't have AI in it, period. And it's just going to be common practice for us to have an AI assistant in the writing tools that we use daily that help us write, or that help us crunch numbers, or that help us forecast. It's just going to be what we do. We're not even going to question it. And it's going to be funny to look back and say, oh, wow, this last year we were, talking about AI and everybody had an AI at the end of their name. That's going to change. But what I think that is interesting about what Simply Augmented does and how I think about it is there's going to be certain core workflows that businesses go through that are going to need to be thought through and that are going to need to be optimized. And every business is different, right? Your value proposition and what you deliver to customers is very different than another company. And there's going to be companies like ours that integrate into existing workflows and be able to optimize those with humans in the loop. And so I just think in the future, it's going to be a lot quieter, but it's going to be very, very prevalent.
Yeah. It's so funny because it's hard to imagine. It's been so long since the internet was, basically became fully integrated into business. I remember in the mid 90s or even towards the mid to late 90s, I worked for a company that wouldn't let us send emails externally. Like it was just absolutely
right.
It was too much
Amazing.
risk, right? And now you think about how did I ever survive without email externally, right? And what was it like when you had to open up a Yellow Pages and start cold calling to try and generate business? And now we're producing content that drives business to us, right? And so it's so interesting how the landscape has changed. And I think some of us don't fully appreciate how dramatic that shift actually was. And it will be really telling what happens in the future. And along those lines, what is it, if a small business owner or a medium-sized business owner is watching this podcast, they're thinking about like, hey, right now it's just not the right time for me to make an investment, but what could they be doing today that would prepare them to get the most out of AI in the future?
Yeah, I think it's two things. There are a lot of tools out there that aren't that expensive that you can start using today, with protections in place so that your employees aren't sharing proprietary information, but that you could start using these tools. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important. There are some businesses and there's some municipalities that have just said, we're not using any of these tools. You can't use any of these tools and you can't put any information into these tools. But then there's others like New York City that's saying, no, we want you to use these tools. We want you to experiment and see how these things work. It's important because it's important for our constituents for you to be able to learn these. So I think training is a big part of it. And even if you're not ready to make a huge investment, you can start doing that now. You can train now. You can start using these tools now. The other thing that I think a lot of people miss is the data that you have in your business is super valuable and super important. And it's time for everybody to get their data in order, because if your data is in order, it's going to make attaching and integrating AI into the system so much easier. Now, we've been talking about big data for a long time. It's not like that's a new conversation, but you'd be surprised how many businesses have structured data and unstructured data, and it's a mess. And so I think those two things are good to do now, and then the big investment can come in the future.
Awesome. Well, I know we're getting close to the end of the time, but one of the things I love to always ask the entrepreneurs that I've had on this show is, what are you currently working on personally today? What is it that you're trying to learn or develop about yourself to help you be a better leader or business owner in the future?
I'm glad you asked that question. I love that question. And, in all the years that I was an EO, it was always kind of thinking about my personal journey, my business journey, my family journey. I think the thing that I think about the most now is how I stay in my energy and my genius zone as much as I can during the day. And whether that's delegating some of those to a person or delegating some of the tasks that I do to a machine, I'm really trying to think about, am I doing something right now that brings me energy? Am I doing something right now that's really moving the needle for my business?
Yeah.
And I can be honest with you, some days it's not. Some days I don't live up to that and I fail, but I'm really trying to think about that, because when I think about the future, I want to make big strides in the next decade of my life. And I think the way to do that is by really pushing hard and living into the things that bring you energy.
Love it. There's the first person I ever had on this podcast was Lex Sisney, who's the author of The Genius Zone. And he talks about the same thing. What is the highest, best use of our time? What gives us energy versus takes our energy? And what takes energy from you is something that would give somebody else energy. And we've just got to figure out how to make sure we stay in the place that we can put our time, energy, and efforts into something that is the most impact for the business. And generally they align. So that's super cool to hear.
Yeah.
Well, let's leave it there. We've been talking to Boaz Ashkenazy, the CEO of Simply Augmented. And one thing I would just encourage our listeners, if you are thinking about the intersection of your business and AI, I would encourage a conversation with the team at Simply Augmented. As we talked about earlier, I have no interest in making the recommendation. Only a personal experience has been extremely positive, and one that I would encourage any of our listeners to listen to. But with that, Boaz, where can people go to learn more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so if you go to simplyaugmented.com, go to our website and definitely start a chat with us. And then the shiftaipodcast.com is a place to check out Shift AI, which is on YouTube and on all the other podcast streaming. So yeah, I would love for you to check that out and give me feedback. And yeah, I really appreciate being on here with you, David. It's really wonderful talking to you.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you too. And I will put those links to both your podcast and your business into the show notes. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon. So thanks again for being on today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilssen. Be sure to click subscribe to future episodes so you can hear from more top entrepreneurs and thought leaders. And we'll see you again next time.